Hi there, I'm Paul Fortunato, and this is the Philosophy in Tolkien YouTube channel. I was sitting around a fire pit last week with some friends of mine, and it was dark here in Houston, Texas, and there was a fire pit in the middle, and we were sitting around, and some of us were even smoking, which was very Tolkienian, and we had this incredible conversation where we could just open up and talk for hours, really, about the things that were on our minds. And that made me think about why we read literature, why we read great stories, whether it's Tolkien or other stories, and then talk about them. And that's partly what this series is about, is talking about stories and thinking with other people about how they help us think about who we are, what we're doing here, what it means to have a fulfilled life. And because I'm talking about the philosophy behind Tolkien and how literature can really help us live a more full life. And so let me start with something which maybe isn't so obvious. It's Tom Bombadil. Now, in the Fellowship of the Ring, Tom Bombadil has an unusual character. And it's not even totally clear who Tom Bombadil is, but we'll talk about that. In this scene, the hobbits who are fleeing the Shire happen to get saved by Tom Bombadil, and they go to his house. And the hobbits enter the house, and there's his wife, Goldberry. And here's how Tolkien describes the scene. The hobbits looked at her in wonder, and she looked at each of them and smiled. "Fair Lady Goldberry," said Frodo at last, feeling his heart moved with a joy that he did not understand. He stood as he had at times stood, enchanted by fair elven voices. But the spell that was now laid upon him was different. Less keen and lofty was the delight, but deeper and nearer to mortal heart, marvelous and yet not strange. And so what's going on here? They are entering into a place where they're in touch with a spirit, a spiritual being, Goldberry and Tom Bombadil. What words is Tolkien using? Wonder, which is the beginning of philosophy. He looked at her in wonder. He was enchanted as he had been by fair elven voices. Enchantment, which is also part of philosophy. And then what happens is that Frodo, in this case, is so enchanted he's inspired. And he's inspired to sing a song. So he says, "Fair Lady Goldberry," he said again, "now the joy that was hidden in the songs we heard is made plain to me. O slender as a willow wand, O clearer than clear water, O reed by the living pool, fair river daughter, O springtime and summertime and spring again after, O wind on the waterfall and the leaves' laughter." Suddenly he stopped and stammered, overcome with surprise to hear himself saying such things. And so he spontaneously ushers forth with this song. He'd been hearing Tom Bombadil sing these songs, and then that song stuck in him, and that he himself creates the song himself. And this is how stories and songs and art and ritual work in Tolkien. You see them, the people take them in, and then you find yourself within them. I'm going to switch gears slightly and read a philosophy text, which maybe it doesn't seem like it would go with this, but I think you'll see that it does. This is from a philosopher named Alistair MacIntyre, And the book is called After Virtue. And in this book, MacIntyre also talks about stories and narrative and how people are narrative beings. And he says this towards the end of the book, this is page 216, about humans. He says, man is in his actions and practice, as well as in his fictions, essentially a storytelling animal. He is not essentially, but becomes, through his history, a teller of stories that aspire to truth. But the key question for men is not about their own authorship. I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can answer the prior question of what story or stories do I find myself a part? Of what story or stories do I find myself a part, says MacIntyre, or asks MacIntyre. And in Tolkien, this is what happens to Frodo. He finds himself in this story that he had originally heard from Tom Bombadil. And over and over again in The Lord of the Rings, characters find stories, inspire them, and then find that those stories are their own stories. Stories and songs. And so I'll just close with this point in this episode. You know, songs are a huge part of Tolkien. They're not just entertainment, they're not just kind of window dressing to the story, to the action, but the songs are about shaping people's identity, who they are, and even creating the world. In the beginning, when in the Silmarillion it tells the story of God creating the world, God creates through songs. He sings the world into being, and then through the angelic type figures, they also join in the song, and then human beings later on. Or Aragorn, when they are beset by the Black Riders in the Fellowship of the Ring, and they're really afraid that they could get killed. They sit around the fire, and they don't start planning an attack. Aragorn starts singing a song about Beren and Luthien, and to sort of inspire the wayfarers, or Bilbo, inspired by the Song of the Dwarves and the Hobbit. Over and over again, songs inspire characters, help them find out who they are, shape their identity. And this is what we'll be talking about as we work our way through The Lord of the Rings and accompanying texts, and try to get at the philosophy of what Tolkien is getting at through these wonderful texts.